This Week in Palestine offers news from a Palestinian perspective. The following hour may contain views that do not necessarily reflect those of WZBC, Boston College, or its Board of Trustees. Good morning. Good evening, wherever you are. This is your guest host, Dr. Rana Awad. Welcome to This Week in Palestine. Today is April 27th, 2025. صباح الخير، مساء الخير، وين ما كنتم، وأهلا بكم بهذا الأسبوع في فلسطين. معكم الدكتورة رنا.
6 years old, with ribbons in her hair, laughing with joy, looking outside from her bedroom window. Mama, when the war is done, can I go play outside again? But the tanks kept rolling in. Can I go play outside again? No, Mama, I wanna go outside again. Trapped in the car, the siren screamed. Her cousins lay still, just children's dreams. Hello, is anyone there? Please don't leave me alone. But the world just heard a tone. Oh, hey, little angel, your voice still flies through the smoke and the ruins, through the world's cries. They said they'd come, but no one came, just static on the line, and a child's name. Please come and get me. I'm so scared, I hear the booms. I'm so scared. Come and get me, come and get me. I'm scared, it's getting dark, it's getting dark, so dark, it's getting so dark. 12 days of searching, her hands so small, found in the rubble, no breath at all. Mama, I'm scared, it's getting the last words left in the cold, while the killers walked free, bold. Please come and get me. I'm so scared, I hear the booms, and I'm so scared. Come and get me, come and get me. Mama, I'm scared, it's getting dark, it's getting dark, so dark, it's getting so dark. Write it in the sky, carve it in the stone. A child called for help and was left alone. No sirens, no saviors, just guns in the night. Who will answer for his light? I'm scared, it's getting. Oh, hey, little angel, little bird in heaven, your wings were clipped, but your song shakes the world from the graves they've ripped. Forgive us, we let you down. The war isn't over, it just killed a friend. Please come and get me. I'm so scared, I hear the booms, and I'm so scared. Come and get me, come and get me. Mama, I'm scared, it's getting dark, it's getting dark, so dark, it's getting so dark.
Netanyahu is taking the idea of making Gaza uninhabitable with alarming seriousness. Even though Trump later dismissed his earlier suggestion as just an idea, Netanyahu appears to be following through with a plan that has devastating consequences. Reports indicate that over 100 children are being killed daily, alongside the destruction of homes, schools, hospitals, and essential infrastructure. Netanyahu justifies these actions by claiming that he will not stop until Hamas is completely eradicated. However, the reality is far more harrowing. His policies and actions treat all civilians, including women, children, and the elderly, as if they were Hamas. This indiscriminate targeting paints a grim picture of a strategy aimed at wiping out the population of Gaza entirely. The scale of destruction and loss of life is staggering. Entire neighborhoods are being reduced to rubble, leaving families homeless and communities shattered. The blockade on Gaza has already created a dire humanitarian crisis, with limited access to food, water, and medical supplies. Now the relentless bombardment and military operations have pushed the region to the brink of collapse. The argument that these actions are necessary for security is a winning narrative within Netanyahu's political circles, but it ignores the immense human cost and the long-term consequences of such devastation. Netanyahu's actions also reflect a broader disregard for international laws and norms. The targeting of civilians and the destruction of critical infrastructure violate numerous international agreements. Yet the global response remains muted. Western nations, while often vocal about human rights in other contexts, continue to provide Israel with the resources and support needed to carry out these operations. This complicity enables the ongoing tragedy and raises questions about the role of the international community in perpetuating or preventing such atrocities. The situation in Gaza is not just a local or regional issue. It is a humanitarian crisis that demands global attention. The silence of the international community is deafening, and the lack of action only serves to embolden those who perpetrate these acts. The people of Gaza are not statistics. They are individuals with hopes, dreams, and lives that have been upended by violence and displacement. The world must confront this reality and take a stand against the policies and actions that have led to such widespread suffering. In the end, the narrative that frames these actions as a fight against terrorism obscures the deeper truth. This is not just about Hamas. It is about a systemic effort to erase a population and their identity. The destruction of Gaza is not just physical. It is cultural, emotional, and existential. The international community must recognize this for what it is and act accordingly. Silence is not neutrality. It is complicity. And complicity allows the suffering to continue unchecked. The people of Gaza deserve more than the world's indifference. They deserve justice, dignity, and the chance to rebuild their lives. Let's listen together to Emptying Gaza argument from Norman Finkelstein view in the Chris Hedges Report.
Israel has blocked all food and humanitarian aid into Gaza and cut off electricity so that the last water desalination plant no longer functions. The Israeli military has seized half of the territory. Gaza is 25 miles long and 4 to 5 miles wide, and placed 2/3 of Gaza under displacement orders, rendered no-go zones, including the border town of Rafah, which is encircled by Israeli troops. Defense Minister Israel Katz recently vowed that Israel will, quote, intensify the war against Hamas and use all military and civilian pressure, including evacuation of the Gaza population south and implementing United States President Donald Trump's voluntary migration plan for Gaza residents. Since Israel's unilateral ending of the ceasefire on March 18th, which was never honored by Israel, Israel has been carrying out relentless bombing and shelling against civilians, killing over 1,400 Palestinians and wounding over 3,600, according to the Palestine Health Ministry. An average of 100 children are being killed daily, according to the United Nations. Israel is at the same time accusing Egypt of treaty violations to lay what may be the groundwork for a mass expulsion of Palestinians into the Egyptian Sinai. Israel says it will not lift the total blockade until Hamas is quote-unquote defeated and the remaining 59 Israeli hostages are released. But no one in Israel or Gaza expects Hamas, which has weathered the decimation of Gaza and sustained mass slaughter, to surrender or disappear. The question no longer is will the Palestinians be deported from Gaza, but when they will be pushed out and where they will go. Joining me to discuss the crisis in Gaza, Israel's intentions in Gaza, and its ramifications in the Middle East is the Middle Eastern scholar Norman Finkelstein. Professor Finkelstein is the author of numerous books, including The Rise and Fall of Palestine and Gaza, and Gaza, an inquest into its martyrdom. Let's talk about what we're seeing. It is absolutely horrendous. Everything has been cut off, and it appears clear from numerous statements by the Israeli leadership that they aren't quite intent on depopulating Gaza.
Well, I think the goal of the assault on Gaza that began on October 8th, the goal or the objective is perfectly clear. There hasn't been really much in the way of disguising it. And the goal is to once and for all solve the Gaza question. And they were prepared to use any means within the limits or constraints imposed by the international community, and in particular the United States. There were three, as we might call it, modus operandi, and they flowed into each other. These aren't hermetically sealed compartments. There was outright genocide, which was actually carried out with greater efficiency than Israel is normally credited for. So to take just two examples, number one, and just so we can remain clearly focused, I'm now dealing with the outright genocidal aspect of Israel's final solution to the Gaza question. Between October 7th and October 31st, the very first month of the Israeli assault on Gaza, approximately 1,900 children were killed, according to Air Wars, which is a reputable military assessment organization. So 1,900 children between October 7th and October 31st. If you take the very worst month of the situation in Syria, it was in 2016. The worst month, approximately 250 children were killed versus 1,900. Now, if you take the very worst year in the Syrian situation, approximately 1,900 children were killed. Almost exactly the number of killed in Gaza between October 7th and October 31st. So often you hear the argument, well, if Israel was carrying out genocide, how comes they haven't killed the whole population, dropped the nuke or whatever? Well, in fact, within the political constraints, their achievement is actually quite impressive. To take another example, the Israelis killed 300 times more children than have been killed in Ukraine proportionately. If you take in all the factors, size of population, duration of conflict, and so forth, and you juxtapose the two, 300 times more children have been killed in Gaza. And as you know, Chris, if you take any metric, number of UN workers killed, number of medics killed, number of journalists killed, proportion of civilians to combatants killed, proportion of children killed, proportion of women and children killed. If you take any metric, Israel for the 21st century is in a class all its own. And in fact, for some metrics like amount of tonnage of bombs dropped, it surpasses places like Dresden. I mean, we have to go back to World War II to find the right comparison. So we should not underestimate the extent or the effectiveness, the extent and efficacy of the genocidal element of Israel's assault on Gaza. The second element was the ethnic cleansing aspect, and that element was not as successful because there were no takers for it in the Arab world. Whether it will ultimately be the final solution remains to be seen. And the third metric is the most important one, in my opinion. It's what you might call the fait accompli metric. That is, make Gaza uninhabitable. And therefore, by hook or by crook, everybody, save a handful of people, you're familiar with the expression of Mr. Netanyahu, we have to thin out the population of Gaza. And I think that's the stage we're in now, to leave no option, no alternative except to leave. Now, I would want to make a couple of additional remarks on that point. Number one, to the extent that Israel allowed for some humanitarian aid to enter, or was some restraints were placed on, for example, its attacks on hospitals, those were all dependent on international news coverage. Now, Mr. Netanyahu, he knows the American scene, and he knows the American media. And there have been very good, very sophisticated political science studies done correlating Israel's military action with news coverage. I can give you one which I had written about, but there are many examples. When Israel launched its ground invasion of Gaza in 2014, they launched the day after the Malaysian airliner was shot down, I guess over Ukraine, if my memory is correct. They're always waiting for the cameras to move elsewhere. And that, in effect, is what accounts for what's happening now. Because now it's kind of like a bacchanalia of genocide. I've stopped watching it. You probably know at this point more than me. But do you know why it's happening now? It's because all the newspapers, all the media is Trump, 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 Trump. And the Israelis know it. This is their opportunity. When all the media is focused on Trump, it's not so much, incidentally, that he gave them the green light. That's not why what's happening. It's because the media stopped covering it. It's just Trump. And so it's an opportunity which I don't believe the Israelis will let pass. Right now, the aim is, one, to make Gaza uninhabitable, and two, to break the will of the people so that they will start screaming. You remember the famous line by Henry Kissinger during the Allende regime, we're going to make the economy scream. And now the Israelis, their goal, their objective is to make the Gazans scream so as to put the pressure on the Arab world to open the gates. But just bear in mind, you mentioned absolutely correctly, for now a month and a week, I guess it is, there's been no food, fuel, water, electricity admitted to Gaza. Now you must remember, that's exactly what Defense Minister Gallant said on the first week in October. We're not going to admit any food, fuel, water, electricity. The only reason they were forced to back away from that, they started to back away in October 15th. It was because of the international pressure, which then forced Biden and Blinken to tell Israel, you have to accommodate to some degree international opinion. It was the same order, and Biden and Blinken would have gone along with it were it not for the international coverage. Right now, there's no coverage, so they can do whatever they want.
There are two aspects of this potential population transfer. One, the reports that both the United States and Israel has been speaking to Sudan, Somaliland, and Somalia. Somaliland is an offshoot which wants diplomatic recognition. All of these countries need money. The Sudan has said that they will not accept Palestinians. And the other factor is that you have Israeli officials now attacking Egypt for breaking the Camp David Accords by building military infrastructure and moving troops up into the northern Sinai. This is something the Egyptians deny. It's Israel that, of course, has broken the Camp David by now occupying that, the Philadelphia corridor, which is supposed to be demilitarized. But it does appear that, if we're watching this from the outside, that they are split as to where they're going to go. Are they going to be shipped to Africa? I'm not sure how they get there. I mean, Syria has also been completely destroyed. Israel has carried out numerous airstrikes against what's left of the Syrian military since the overthrow of Assad. But Gaza is not contiguous to Syria. They have to bust them there. Do you have any thoughts about?
No. I never pretend to military type knowledge. What I would say is I didn't disagree. I think, however, the wording is critical. Israel says it will not stop until Hamas is destroyed. I don't believe it has anything to do with Hamas. I know I'm a minority in that opinion. Okay, it's a marginal factor, but this is not about Hamas. This is about the final solution to Gaza. You know and I know, until every last Gazan is gone, Israel can keep saying we haven't destroyed Hamas.
Right.
Well, how can anyone prove whether or not Hamas has been defeated? There's no measure for that. There's no evidence for that. You could say, okay, the evidence would be when Israel stops taking casualties. Well, guess what? On average, Israel's taken 1 casualty a day in Gaza. So that's not a huge number. For 18 months, about 400 Israelis have been killed. So what is going to prove that Hamas has been defeated? I know what's going to prove it. When there's no one left in Gaza, that will be the proof. So even using this language as if setting up that we're going to use the standard of when Hamas is defeated, first of all, in my opinion, we can disagree on this. I don't think there was anything to defeat. There was no war in Gaza. It's been 18 months. 18 months. Can you name a battle? Has any reporter, any journalist reported a battle in Gaza? There's been no battles. There have been about 1 casualty a day. Probably half of those were friendly fire. So I think we just have to, in the course of what's been happening in Gaza, there were basically 2 paradigms, if I can use that big word. 2 paradigms. One paradigm was this is an Israel-Hamas war. And of course, the media ran with that because, well, it's a war and things happen in the war. And then there was a second paradigm. That was the South African paradigm. This is not a war. It's a genocide. And by calling it a war, you're effectively obfuscating the most critical aspect of what's happening. You'll forgive me for repeating myself if I've said it before to you, but I remember there was a famous book, well, you're old enough to remember, by Lucy Dawidowicz. It was called The War Against the Jews. Now, Lucy Dawidowicz was a complete moron. She was just a hack. Her book was awful. But there was a second paradigm. The second paradigm was by a serious historian. That was Raoul Hilberg, sociologist. What did he call his magnum opus? He called it the destruction of European Jewry. It wasn't a war. It was a systematic destruction. And my mother, who was very sensitive to language, somehow she mastered English faster than I could, at a much faster pace than me. And she would always get indignant when anyone described as what she endured during World War II as a war. She would always say, and I'll just say it's a point of personal, if I might use the word, gratification, how over and over again my mother's insights were later validated by books I read by serious individuals. I could give you other examples if you're interested, but for the moment right now, my mother would say very emphatically, it was not a war. It was an extermination. We were like roaches. The exterminator shines the light on us here, we run there. Shines the light on us there, we run here. It was an extermination. And I think we have to be very careful as it's unfolding in real time, not to use the language of a war. Because once you start using that language, Israel wins 99% of the propaganda war. So I don't think people say I'm defeatist on this. I'm not defeatist. And of course, if there were a resistance, no one would be happier than me. But sometimes, in a tiny parcel of land as you described it, the estimates are Israel has dropped more than 4 atomic bombs. The idea of a resistance in that situation, if you read the descriptions, before any of the Israeli troops move a centimeter, they obliterate everything ahead of them, everything to the side of them, everything is obliterated. How, in those circumstances, can you realistically speak about a resistance?
Yes, and we should also be clear that Hamas does not have armor, artillery, an air force, navy, mechanized units, all of the accoutrements of a modern army that, of course, Israel is deploying against them. They have small arms, nothing else. I want to ask, what are there any impediments that you can foresee that would stop Israel from depopulating Gaza? Any external impediments? Obviously, there are none internally in Israel.
Look, I think about that every day. I really do. You're looking for that magic bullet. You're looking for that miracle. I don't see it. I had some hope for a period in the student encampments, and they were spreading with an unusual rapidity or celerity, and they were spreading around the world. And having memories of the 1960s, you see a potential there. I was surprised at the ease with which they were crushed. But on the other hand, it has to be borne in mind, the price was very high that the students were expected to pay. First of all, the encampments began at the elite universities, where tuitions are in the stratosphere. So if you get expelled, you're losing $80,000 in tuition. Then the encampments, I'm not saying the broad support, but the encampments, which were the concentration of support. In most schools, even places like MIT, they were overwhelmingly non-white. And I would say preponderantly, they were foreigners. And so they were even a higher price, which is expulsion plus deportation. And that was already looming in the spring. So when you consider the ruthlessness with which they were crushed, I guess it's not altogether a surprise that when the new semester began this year, they had already vanished from sight. There were some internecine struggles, but that always happens when you lose masses of people. The ultras take over, and it always gets a little bit squalid, but I don't think it was the main factor. The main factor was brute force or force majeure that was exerted on them. And then, at some points during the actual conflict, there was hope with the Hezbollah that they could escalate the price Israel would pay. That didn't happen. Then people began to hope against hope that the Houthis can turn the tide. That didn't happen. And as you could see from my recital, it became progressively more desperate, the search for that magic bullet. There was some hope from the International Court of Justice, which in general acquitted itself with honor when you consider the failure everywhere else. The fact that the judges in their overwhelming majority stood firm. And I think they did the best they could under the circumstances. It wasn't enough, but there was nothing to stop the killing machine. And once Trump was elected, I think it's incorrect to say it was because he gave the green light. It was because the cameras were gone. If you open up the homepage of the New York Times, which I'm sure you do, it's just Trump, 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 line 2, Trump, 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 line 3. That's all they needed. That's all Israel needed. And now we can get on with the business. You remember when Gallant first gave the order, no food, fuel, water, electricity, that evoked an outcry. And they were forced to retreat by October 15th. And then there was a fuller retreat later, I think by October 27th, if my memory is right. This time they weren't forced to retreat.
I want to ask about the press, because the New York Times ran a story on Monday about the universities, and the way they characterized the protests was that they harassed Jewish students. I don't believe any Jewish students that I know of were arrested. I don't think any were beaten. I don't think any were sent to the hospital by being sprayed with a chemical on the steps of Low Library. But the press really laid the groundwork for what's happening by mischaracterizing these encampments as essentially, dens of Hamas supporters and anti-Semites. I know you were in the encampments, as was I. It was completely untrue.
Well, now there is a new game being played that all the assault, this brazen, outrageous assault on academic freedom began with Mr. Trump. And so a large part of what happened is being deposited in George Orwell's memory hole. It didn't begin with Trump. We all have clear memories. They haven't yet been rinsed clean by the powers that be. They began when the Jewish supremacist billionaire class decided to do their share for the cause, and they saw their share. Already some of the Jewish supremacist billionaires had done their share, like Sheryl Sandberg. So she channeled her Leni Riefenstahl and made this propaganda epic called Screams Before Silence, or as I've re-Christianed it, Scheiss Before Schlock, which purported that Hamas had weaponized rape as a weapon of, had weaponized rape, mass rape, and she released that, I guess it was February 2024. It was like Birth of a Nation. If she was channeling Leni Riefenstahl, because Sheryl Sandberg is a feminist, its precursor in the U.S. was Birth of a Nation. The same theme: we need white men to protect white womanhood from these feral, dark-skinned creatures. You will perhaps know that Birth of a Nation was the first film ever shown in the White House. And Sheryl Sandberg's Scheiss Before Schlock was shown in the Biden White House. So she was the first one to enter the ranks for the cause. And then come the spring, Bill Ackman, who's married to, he has a trophy wife from Israel. She's an airline. She was in the Israeli Air Force. Barry Sternlicht at Brown University, Robert Kraft at Columbia University. They reached for the blackmail weapon. It was very straightforward. It was not done behind closed doors. Either you crush the encampments, or you're not getting our alumni money. And then began a saga which is unprecedented in American history. We've had repressive eras, for sure. There was the era around World War I, the Red Scare, and that was the era, you'd be probably interested to know, that the AAUP was born, the American Association of University Professors, which then wrote the famous Principles of Academic Freedom. And that was because the robber barons, or the billionaire class now, the robber barons back then, were putting pressure on universities to fire professors, just a few, wasn't a large number, a few professors who were showing some solidarity with the union movement during that era. And then the second big, of course, assault on academic freedom came with the McCarthy era. But if you look back, there is nothing like what happened in the spring of this past year. Not one, not two, three Ivy League presidents were dispatched, were ousted. Claudine Gay at Harvard, McGill at Pennsylvania, and Shafiq at Columbia. Three Ivy League presidents, and bear in mind, two of the three were women of color, so they had all the protections of woke ideology, and all three, and there wasn't a word of criticism. You know, they tried to mask.
Well, they didn't. They did not denounce the genocide. They just didn't grovel enough.
They didn't grovel enough. And Claudine Gay, actually, she was completely correct when she said before the House committee, she said this question of a slogan like "from the river to the sea." She said it does pose a civil liberties issue. Even if it was directly genocidal, it would still pose a civil liberties issue because everybody forgot what our own history on freedom of speech is. You, of course, know that in our country, you're allowed to advocate the violent overthrow of the government. That's a right that the Supreme Court validated. Only if it comes right up against conduct does it become permissible to prohibit it. But short of that, actually, I've read the Supreme Court decisions. I think they're quite well reasoned. I was impressed by the reasoning because I'm a person of the left, as you know. So I'm wondering, why would a bourgeois state allow you to advocate the violent overthrow of government? That doesn't seem to sit well with my understanding of capitalism and the bourgeois class and everything. And then when you read the Supreme Court decisions, how they're reasoned, they were reasoned basically as follows, that even though we disagree with the violent overthrow of the government, say the justices, they may have some interesting criticisms of what's wrong with our society or our system of governance or our economic system. So even though we don't agree with advocating the violent overthrow of the government, we would lose something valuable if we suppressed the speech. And it was on those grounds that they justified the violent overthrow of the government. Now, many people in this country, I'm not criticizing them, I'm not agreeing with them, but many people in this country are very patriotic and they revere the American flag. But our Supreme Court ruled during the Vietnam War that it was a form of expressive speech to burn the flag. So when Claudine Gay said, she was asked the question, if somebody was saying something outright genocidal against Jews, what would you say? And he said it was a complicated question. And that's factually correct. I mean, I think most of these people sitting on these committees would be shocked at what the Supreme Court has ruled in our jurisprudence on the subject of freedom of speech. You might recall there was a funny one I liked. A fellow walked into court wearing a shirt saying, "Fuck the draft." And the judge didn't like that. Well, guess what? That was upheld. And now here's the most interesting one, Chris, because you're old enough to remember these things. Most of the young people have not a clue. They're always shocked when they go through this history. You must remember that the signature of freedom of speech or First Amendment case in the 1980s was the Skokie, Illinois.
Yeah.
Whether the American Nazi Party had the right to assemble and march through a community of Holocaust survivors in Skokie, Illinois. And lo and behold, the Illinois courts ruled they had that right. Now compare, because the standard now is if students feel unsafe, unwanted, or uncomfortable, that's grounds to suppress speech. Well, Chris, how do you think survivors of the Nazi Holocaust felt? Do you think they felt comfortable? Do you think they felt welcome? Do you think they felt wanted when the Nazi Party marched through Skokie, Illinois? But our court said that was protected speech. And because of, in my opinion, the disaster that befell our political left when the woke politics and cancel culture set in, all of that history was erased. And so it was easy. It was handing it to the other side in a silver platter for the Jewish billionaire class to say, we're withholding our monies because Jewish students feel unsafe, unwanted, and unwelcome, and uncomfortable, however you want to put it. So the reality, I speak honestly. I'm not afraid of the truth. I have a wonderful friend. She lives out in North Carolina. She went for a solidarity with the Palestinians event, I guess a couple of days ago. And she wrote me and she said they were chanting the "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free." And she said, frankly, I didn't feel comfortable with it. And I don't like that slogan. I've said that on many occasions. I don't like that slogan. But on the other hand, there are a lot of slogans I don't like, and I have to learn to live with them. Of course, if it comes from quote unquote my people, my comrades and so forth, I try to reason and explain why I think it's a wrong slogan. But people have that right. That right is protected. And therefore, if you felt unwelcome, uncomfortable, unwanted, it's too bad.
Well, it's also, Norm, this isn't about anti-Semitism. I think
it has nothing to do with anti-Semitism.
It has to do with shutting down the left and deforming universities into centers that cater to the power structure completely, including taking departments at Columbia and putting them, which is just something out of fascist Germany, putting them under government control.
Yeah. Look, Chris, I want to, we're both roughly of the same age cohort, and I want to have a serious conversation about this. I am against any government intervention or interference. I have come to accept the principles of academic freedom, even as they never protected me. But I still accept the principles as correct. Your peers are the only individuals competent to judge your competence in your discipline. We don't let arbitrary people decide who teaches physics. We don't let them decide who teaches chemistry, biology, mathematics, on the basic principle that only your peers possess that kind of competence. And on reflection, that seems to me a perfectly sensible standard. So I am, even though I didn't benefit from that protection, actually I think my peers were the first ones who would judge me not competent. As against the general population, I would probably do better with
I just want to interject because your peers recommended you for tenure at DePaul, and then in overturning procedures because of pressure from Dershowitz and all of these.
Totally correct, and I should, and my occasional bitterness, I shouldn't lose sight of that fact. So the fact is, you are correct, and I'm never afraid to say I'm wrong. The academic freedom held up for me. That's correct, except at a level where it was outside interference. So I'm against any outside interference. But having said that, there was a problem in the humanities. There was a problem in the liberal arts. There was a problem with people carrying on with very assiduous intellectual capacity, carrying on like apparatchiks. Now, I would challenge you, maybe for a future conversation. Choose a university at random. Choose any university at random, and go look at its course offerings in English department. Look at the course offerings. First of
It's
all,
all it's all textual criticism. It's Derrida and all this
it's
stuff.
textual criticism, but also in the course offerings, not in comparative lit, but just in English. You know, where once upon a time you read Shakespeare and you read Dickens and you read Austen and you read and you read. Now, if I were to tell you what you read, I would get accused of uh, any manner of sin. So I'm not going to even name the titles. You go and look. You know, I had this conversation a few days ago with Brianna Joy Gray because it irks me that the same liberal elites who champion this woke culture, they send their kids to schools where they read the classics. And then when one of my students from, say, City University, a public university, if he or she manages by some miracle to get into a top grade law school or professional school, they don't know if they're coming or going because their peers are citing Shakespeare and are citing Plato and are citing Aristotle. And I won't tell you what they read in my college. I know this for a fact because I've mentored several students who I tried to steer on a firm foundation because they're very bright and they're going places. And we go through the course catalogs together. You know, in my time, and it's not that long ago, it's long ago, but not that long ago, in 100 level courses in English, it would be Shakespeare's histories, Shakespeare's tragedies, Shakespeare's comedies, 3 different courses. Histories, that was 100 level. And then, of course, it becomes more sophisticated, 200 and 300 level. Now, in a choice of as many as 100 courses, you might get 1 course in Shakespeare, maybe 1. 1. British literature, 1 course, a survey course, out of 100. So you're thinking, well, then what are the other 99? Well, I say, Chris Hedges, brace yourself. Brace yourself. So why do I say all this? They need a house cleaning. They do. I want it come from inside. But Trump and company, it was served to them on a silver platter because nobody likes those classes. I talk to the students. You can't disagree. There's a party line. And woe to you if you are a male and you're taking a course that includes female authors. No, I'm serious. You can't open your mouth.
No, I know. I'm with you that. And you know, I spent 8 years in a university, and that's all I did, including Greek and Latin. I know at Princeton they've banned Richard Wright. Black Boy is one of the great works of 20th century literature. That's another show, Norm. I want to talk, just to end here, about your book, Gaza, Inquest into Its Martyrdom, because what you do in that book is document not only the detailed reports, the Goldstein report and others that exhaustively detail the war crimes. You have a chapter on the Mari Marva, the Turkish ship that was attacked by Israeli commandos, Operation Cast Lead. And so all of this stuff was documented. All of these were, including, of course, Lebanon, the Israeli incursion into Lebanon, the bombing of West Beirut, et cetera, et cetera. It's all been documented and has had no effect. And you write about the Goldstone report, but you also in the book write about figures like Hillary Clinton who are proud of obstructing any effort to act on those reports. And I think that that's an important point because it totally paved the way for the genocide. And I wondered if you could, as we end, talk about that.
Yes, I think that I don't blame Richard Goldstone because I think he was blackmailed. And,
well, because he recanted he said he wrote a column for the Washington Post that said if he knew now what he had known then, he would have written the report. But this guy was under tremendous pressure. They really went after him because he was Jewish and a Zionist. But he was honest.
Yes, well, he was honest. It was an interesting story. I'll tell it to you very quickly because time doesn't allow. Richard Goldstone was Jewish. He was a Zionist. He was connected with many institutions in Israel. And when he was asked to head the Commission of Inquiry, he said, I really couldn't say no because they told me I could write the terms of reference. So whatever I wanted to investigate, they were agreeable to. So he said, how could you say no in those circumstances? And then he went, it was a four-person commission, Christine Chinkin, not so important, I know the guys. In any event, and he wrote a very devastating report. It was, I think, something on the order of 400 pages. It was a mammoth report. And it was very wide-ranging. It didn't limit itself to Operation Cast Lead, August 26th to January 17th. It looked at the history of the occupation. It looked at the West Bank. It was a very comprehensive, and it was a totally devastating report. Totally devastating. Just as a footnote to that, whenever people say, well, Hamas blocked this and Hamas blocked that and Hamas blocked that, Hamas always cooperated with the international commissions, even though they were totally brutal to Hamas. They all found Hamas guilty of war crimes. Hamas never cared because they figured if we can get something out of these commissions, let them do what they want with us. We'll let it go. Just as they always cooperate. It was always Israel that refused to cooperate with the international commissions of inquiry. And it's not true the commissions of inquiry were soft on Hamas. Absolutely not. They were pretty ruthless with Hamas. In any event, he writes the report, and he comes under devastating attack. Now, of course, Professor Alan Dershowitz is always over the top, and he compared Richard Goldstone to Dr. Mengele. Okay, that was typical Dershowitz, but actually the other attacks weren't much better. He didn't fare much better, Richard Goldstone. And then he basically retracted that report on April 1st, 2011. Initially, I thought it was an April Fool's joke. I couldn't believe it. I had written a lot on Goldstone at that point, and I read the report at least 4 or 5 times because it was a gold mine. And he claimed he got new information that forced him to retract. And John Dugard, who's also a South African jurist, and for your listeners, he was the person who led the delegation. He was a senior counsel at the International Court of Justice during the genocide case. And John Dugard has a very distinguished career. He was the barrister for the Nelson Mandela family when Nelson Mandela was in jail. He was the barrister for Bishop Tutu. And above and beyond all else, he's just a very decent guy. One of those rare birds, a consistent liberal. I'm a radical, he's a liberal, but my heart warms in his sight. In any case, Dugard, among other things, was a special rapporteur on the occupied territories for the UN. And when Richard Goldstone recanted, Dugard wrote, I think it was in the British periodical, he wrote, "There is nothing new, Mr. Goldstone. Nothing new has been revealed since you published that report. I know it because he published simultaneously a report for the Arab League. He was their chief investigator. And fair is fair. Goldstone's was more comprehensive, but Dugard's was more knowledgeable on the law. Dugard is top-notch, top of the shelf. In any event, he said there was nothing new, and then he ended by saying, why Richard Goldstone retracted will go with him to his grave. We'll never know.
Israel is notorious for blackmail, but I want to get into that. I want to get into that moment because I think you cite it as a pivotal moment by which perhaps there was, Israel could have been held to account, and it wasn't. And after that, it was just a free for all.
Yeah, it was. People now forgot, or they're too young to remember. There was a huge outpouring against Israel during Operation Cast Lead. There were hundreds of thousands of people in the street.
We should just say what Operation Cast Lead. This was
It was one of Israel's periodic killing sprees in
assaults
Gaza.
in Gaza.
Yeah, this was 2008 to 9. It ended January 17th, 2009, and it's not without interest why. It ended on that date because Obama was going to be inaugurated on January 20th. And since this was his anointment, he didn't want any distraction by Gaza. So he just called Netanyahu. It wasn't Netanyahu, it was Omar. He just called Ehud Omar and he said, time to stop. I don't want my occasion to be distracted from. My train of thought just went.
Why that was such a pivotal moment.
Yeah, it was a huge outpouring of outrage at what Israel was doing. You might recall at that point, Foreign Minister Tzipi Livni was having trouble visiting the UK because claims were what's called under international law universal jurisdiction. They wanted to prosecute her. And soldiers were having trouble traveling. So it seemed as if there was some possibility. And when Goldstone retracted, as I said, I believe it was blackmail. I personally doubt it was him, but he has a daughter who lives in Israel. And you could imagine, if you look for dirt on anyone, you're going to find it. And if you don't find it on them by some miracle, the person has a clean slate. There's your relatives, And then at that point, Israel was really never again seriously threatened. There have been all sorts of machinations. I believe that the former chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, the ICC, Fatou Bensouda, I believe she was blackmailed by Israel. I wrote a book on that subject, which sold fewer copies than the fingers on your right hand. And the ones that I sold were the ones that I purchased. So it was a closed circle. I believe the current vice president of the International Court of Justice, Julia Sebutindi, I believe she's being blackmailed by Israel. I believe that the former president of the court, Joan Donoghue, who was presiding over the genocide case, I believe that she, for careerist reasons, tried to sabotage the ICJ ruling on a plausible genocide in Gaza. So there's still a lot of dirt. It's the subject of a forthcoming book of mine entitled Gaza's Gravediggers, an inquiry into my memory. I've not been sleeping for weeks. I've just been nonstop working. And I'm nonstop working on the book that an inquiry into something in high places. So I think there's still a lot of machinations going on in the international community. But in general, I think they weren't bad. I mean, if you remember the days of Ban Ki-moon,
right,
and you compare him with Guterres has been making very, like just the other day, the gates of hell have been the gates of hell have been open. He's been good. The whole UN hierarchy, I think fair is fair. I think they were okay, and I thought the ICJ, they did the most they could under the circumstances. So it just wasn't enough.
Yeah. All right, we're going to stop there. Thanks, Norm.
We are officially out of time. If you have any questions or would like to support us in any way, please email at twippodcasts@gmail.com. I would like to thank you for listening, and I would like to thank the team that is working behind the scene to make this show happen. Many thanks to Bob Funk, Stanley Robinson, Steve Lowe, Ann Lucas, Sophia Rose Wallman, Lish Tran, Tahani Abu Musa, Bethany Marks, and Muhammad Al-Ghul. This Week in Palestine is a production of Truth and Justice Radio, currently at the home of WZBC Student Radio at Boston College. As always, we thank you for spending your time with us today, as we continue to work towards Palestinian liberation. See you next week. أعزائي المستمعين، انتهى وقتنا معكم. شكرا لاستماعكم ودعمكم في مواصلة عملنا لتحقيق فلسطين حرة. شكرا لأعضاء هذا الفريق العاملين على إنجاح هذا العرض. إلى اللقاء الأسبوع القادم إن شاء الله.
I'm so scared.